good afternoon and welcome to everyone. I'm Alice Cameron. I'll be your host for this afternoon's webinar, which is Thinking About Death, a Contemplative Room. And our speaker this afternoon is Ulla Jemsonsta. He's an initiator in Archem and head of Archem International. And Ulla is also Professor Emeritus of Jurisprudence. His talk is based on the latest edition of Diada, which is in the Nordic languages, but available via the website. And with that, I'm delighted to hand the floor to Ulla.
Thank you, Alice, and good afternoon, everybody. It is, of course, coincidental that this seminar takes place 2 days after the death of Queen Elizabeth. But it is in some way quite appropriate. The immense attention devoted to the death of Queen Elizabeth has many causes. The most important, of course, being that she was so well respected and so well known. But one reason may also be that death is an under-referred to subject that deserves more attention than it normally receives. If you want a short executive summary of this 45-minute talk that we are going into, it may be that it is one long argument why contemplating death is good for you. You may ask the question why an organization devoted to meditation and communication, Archem, why we kind of think it is important to reflect upon death. And it is because there is a clear connection to meditation. If you go into meditation and especially into long meditations and deepening retreats, that is a clear and strong part of Archem, you will get into touch with some kind of basic dimensions, what you might call other dimensions in your consciousness. And it will not give you answers as to what death is about, but it is a good place to start reflecting upon that, just like reflecting upon other basic dimensions. So you might say that if you reflect upon death, that is in a way meditation. It gets you into contact with some basic dimensions in your psyche and in your life, and so does meditation. It is important when it comes to a topic like this that the comments that you will hear now is they are personal. It's one way of putting it is that in Archem, the pedagogics and the method that is Archem, that is what you might say authorized when you meet someone teaching Archem meditation. They do it as they should do it according to the profile of Archem and what is agreed upon in Archem. But the experience of meditation, that is yours. So what you think and what you reflect upon your life and existential questions, that is not the Archem's, that is yours. And consequently, what you will hear in the 45 following minutes, that is my reflections. That is not any kind of authorized Archem philosophy. Contemplating death is good for you. And the reasons for that we will go into during this talk, they are mostly philosophical, existential, meditative. But we may, just to be in touch with our times, start with a sign-based approach to it. There was referred to in a former issue of Diada, there was some research on persons with lung cancer, terminal lung cancer. They received palliative treatment, but not any kind of curative treatment. And there were two groups. One group then facing their situation, talking about how is it to have a life-threatening diagnosis. And it turned out that the persons that were kind of encouraged to face the situation and talk about it. They had higher life quality. That is, of course, a bit vague concept. One may disagree and agree about what kind of criteria put into that, but there was one objective measurement that was quite surprising, and it turned out that they had longer longevity. They lived longer, the group that talked about and faced their situation. There is, I think, one interesting TED talk about there's several, but one I think was strikingly interesting, and that was by one Matthew O'Reilly. He's a first responder. He's often called into traffic accidents, and some traffic accidents are absolutely horrendous, where people are so bodily damaged that there is no hope. And he said that first, when I came to accidents where the damage of the person in question was total, I often, the persons, he said, if they are conscious, will often ask, will I survive? And he said that from the start, I said instinctively, just like you see in the movies, yes, you will make it. You make it, just hold on. And he said that in one situation, after some years doing this job, I was called to an accident where the person was, it was a young person. It was quite obvious with those damages that they had incurred, there was no hope. And he asked me, will I survive? And I don't know why O'Reilly said, but I kind of just said, no, you will not survive. And I was very struck at the reaction, because the reaction was not desperation. On the contrary, the reaction was that the person got calmer. He said, O'Reilly said that he found peace. And it was obviously a good thing that I said it as it was, that I stopped lying. And O'Reilly said that on later occasions, when there was absolutely no hope, and of course it had to be absolutely no hope, but then if the persons asked me, will I survive? I started saying, no, we will not. And he said that that kind of truthfulness, that was obviously a good thing according to his observations. There was another TED talk that I think was a bit remarkable by Katie Hull. She's the founder of a hospice for children, a pioneer hospice. That means for children that are going to die, and that is, of course, terrible. For if you have children with terminal diagnosis, that is terrible for all, but for children it is especially terrible. And Katie Hull said that, you know, it's so easy for us to get into denial if we face children that have such a diagnosis, because it's so terrible. So we, in a way, can't face it, and we try to kind of deny the situation. And she said that, you know, it is not helpful for the children. The children know that they are going to die. They know that they are terribly ill. And it's quite clear that even if we are not, as adults, are not able to face it, the children will not stop dying because we lie to them. So there is a debate in the modern world and about people kind of discussing death. Are we in a kind of death-denying society? Are we avoiding death, or are we not avoiding death? And some people say that we are not avoiding death because there is so much about death in the media. And you might say now we will have 14 days with Queen Elizabeth and the succession and the funeral and so on. But and we have so many death reports, you know, from wars and from crime scenes and whatever. But the persons opposing this view, and that I'm among them, they would say that, well, we are talking about death, and we are talking about that we have much death as entertainment, we have much death as some kind of big events, but we are not so much talking about our own death and our own mortality, and using the kind of fact that we are going to die as some kind of opportunity for self-reflection. And we are going to die. We all know Woody Allen's kind of joke saying that, I know that we are all going to die, but I hope that God will make an exception for me. And today we may agree about there being a God or not, but we cannot agree about there being no exception. So we are going to die, and as I said, there has been literature saying that that's a topic that is hard to talk about in the modern Western world. Irvin Yalom, a well-known American psychiatrist, he wrote a book about staring at the sun. That was a book about his own life, but also about thinking about death. And he said that if I start, talking about what I'm doing, if people ask me, well, what topics are you into now? And I say that when now I'm writing about death and thinking about death, that was a conversation stopper. It just ended the conversation. And Philippe Barrier, he is a very well-known French historian when it comes to writing about death. He has written about the modern Western attitudes towards death in comparison to the attitudes during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And he says clearly that we are in a kind of death avoidance, death denial society. And Kübler-Ross, which is the most famous person writing about death in modern times, she is a Swiss-American psychiatrist. Her kind of main message was that we isolate, as she said to the US Congress, we isolate both the dying and the old, and it serves a purpose. They are reminders of our own mortality. And I think one kind of example also of this, there are numerous examples, but one is the movie Nothing Like a Dame, that was some years ago. And it portrayed 4 very well-known British actresses. And they were all above 80 years of age. And they had all had very interesting and successful lives with many experiences of all kinds. And they had this conversation about their lives. And then one of them, said, should we talk a little bit about not only the past, but what is awaiting us, about death and dying. And then there was, 1 or 2 comments, and they just said, no, let's talk about something nicer, and the end of the conversation. I think it was quite interesting that this was kind of not problematized in the movie. I saw no comments in the reviews about the movie. And I think it might be taken as some kind of statement that this is a topic that we like to avoid. And in a Norwegian book about death, they have, among other things, interviewed persons working at nursing homes. And that is a nursing home in Norway is a place it's very hard to get into. You really have to have great problems. And you don't get out alive. You will stay there, I think, on average 2 years, and very few people leave a nursing home unless in a coffin. And so it is really a place that is about death. And the person then who wrote this book and used this expression, death has left home, they said that we are in a modern society institutionalizing death and dying. We are dying in nursing homes or in hospitals. But they interviewed then the staff at nursing homes. And they said that the response that they got when they asked, what do you do if a patient wants to talk about death? Because that's where the person is going. Then the response among the nursing staff would be that if a patient wants to talk about death, I lead him into another less depressing topic. And I find this quite striking, that even one thing what we do in society at large, but another thing is what we do at the nursing homes. And you might say that there are many thoughts one might have, many observations one might make about modern society and the attitude towards death. If you, like myself, are inclined to think that we are the kind of death avoiding, when it comes to talking about our own death and our own mortality. And you might say that in the Middle Ages, you'll find many books about dying in a good manner, preparing yourself to die. And in modern times, you will not find many books about dying in a good manner. As the generation of 60s, 80s are getting closer to death, there are more books, yes, but still not many books about dying in a good manner. But we have many books about 100 ways to better sex and the orgasm of your life. And you might say, if you in the future have historians working to see what were people in our age and time preoccupied about, it was more about sex than about death. And you might say that contemplating death is contemplating life. I think there's one quotation from the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky that is quite good. And he said that we only know the light because the shadow and darkness exist. And that is another way we should talk about this, saying that you really understand life and appreciate life if you also remember your own mortality. And it is also something that unites us. I think that, well, you know the numbers. We have been living with our genetic equipment, I nearly said, for 100,000 years. There have been 100 billion of us. And it's sad to say, but everybody has died. That is something that we all do, regardless of background and whatever. And you might say that one fascinating thing about long meditations and deepening meditation is that when you sit in a long meditation, and people going to retreats have talked about that, then you feel a bit at times in a kind of situation where you know that people have been there before you. The kind of feeling that you have, in a way, loneliness, not that you are left, but that you are on your own in the depths of your mind. And the kind of feeling that you have to find your way in that cloudy and misty atmosphere. That is something that you feel that people have been doing, and they have been having that kind of feeling many, many, many years ago, and under quite different circumstances. And also when you contemplate death, you may get into considerations and feelings that you feel that way. These kind of feelings, this kind of sentiment have people been into before. So thinking about death, contemplating death is one way of uniting across ages and across cultures with other human beings. And you might say that, is this a subject for young people? It's understandable that old people think about this. And the answer to that is that, you know, you are mortal all the time. Mortality is part of the human condition, whatever age you have. And thinking about death, and I think it was Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, said that, you know, from the time you are born, you start dying. So it is a topic that is relevant. And people, for example, I got aware of that because a nun that has been reading this issue of Diade, she wrote me and she commented, you know, that this is a topic that in monasteries you work with all the time, because relating to kind of basic human conditions, death is part of it. And also in monasteries, of course, you have young people. You might say that in religions, you have a high degree of death consciousness. And that has traditionally been so that you are thinking about God, you are contemplating those dimensions of life. And as part of that, you are contemplating also your vulnerability and your mortality. And that is a kind of criticism that I think is very relevant, that has been voiced both within the church and outside the Christian churches. It is that in modern Christianity, you have been putting much emphasis and more emphasis on politics and everyday concerns. And the result is that there is less time, less focus on death and purgatory. And when the religions kind of don't put that much emphasis on this and those dimensions on our mortality, then there are no others left, because if you ask a socialist or a liberal or a feminist or a woke person or whatever about death, you know, that's not part of their business. That's not part of their concerns. Their ideologies don't try to answer those questions. So the problem is that if the church goes into politics and leaves death and purgatory behind, there is a vacuum, because there are not that many other kind of institutions having death as their business. And when it comes to New Age, that has been, you might say, some religious substitute or some new religion, you might call it, in modern age. They have much less about the life after death or what death is, than living to maximum potential. So it's more about realizing life, but leaving death out as part of it. If you look at modern funerals and graveyards, when we have modern funerals, it is more emphasis now on celebrating the individual and life. And that is, of course, nice. You have also some funerals where people who are football fans have been kind of put into the coffin in the dress that their football team uses and things like that. And of course, that is a thing you might choose to do, but I think we all feel that at the funeral, you definitely need some words not only about the individual person as such, but you need some words about what the drama of death is all about. And if you don't have that, you may feel some kind of emptiness. In modern cities and in the world in general, there is a lack of space, and especially in modern big cities. And therefore, you have people looking at graveyards and saying, you know, they have some very nice green areas, and why can't we use them as recreational areas? And they have been used now more some places for picnics, you know, having a beer, meeting friends, going for a ride. Exercise is fine. Why don't you take a jog in the graveyard, etc.? And one person then representing graveyard authorities, it said that this is a good thing because it makes death into a more common thing. And I think that then you mix up what you are talking about, because it is good that we confront death more. It is good talking about death and contemplating death. But that does not mean making graveyards into recreational areas, because that is also trivializing death. And what we may agree about death is that it's not a trivial thing. It's a very basic dimension. And it is a dimension that may make us get into touch with some very basic aspects of our consciousness. In Akem, we have been having some meditative farewell since 2017. We are a relatively new organization, and it takes time we start out as a student organization, and now people who are in the organization are, some of them getting older, and then some are also, of course, dying. And we have found that we would like, you know, to have some kind of arrangement around dying for those who like it. It's not to compete with the funeral. It's not to compete with the memory service that the family may have, but it is quite simply after those things have taken place, there is an invitation, if the family agrees to that, about having a meditative farewell where you meditate for 45 minutes or 1 hour, and then you have when you sit in your meditation, after some meditation, you kind of let your thoughts go to the person in question. And afterwards, there are not speeches, but there is a kind of free sharing of memories and what you were thinking about. And it has been a very good way both to reflect upon the person going away, but also from a meditative point of view to reflect upon what is death about. So we all know the expression that God is dead. That is Nietzsche, the German philosopher in the 19th century, who coined this to also say that in modern life, we live our lives as we want to. There is no absolute moral, because if you leave God out, you kind of leave absolute moral out, and there is no one to, take you to account. And that may be true that, for many people, God is dead, in the sense that, of course, what we think about God does not mean anything when it comes to God's existence. But for many people, they have the attitude that God is dead. But you might say that what you may not do away with is death. Death is not dead. So the kind of fact that there will once be an end to our life, that is an absolute fact. And the thing that we don't want to face thinking about this may be that the fact of this. It is something like thinking about God. It is something that makes you think about your life in a more serious way. In communist countries, you have been having God surrogates. They are, of course, atheist ideologies, but you have been treating Lenin and Mao and Kim as some kind of surrogate gods, and celebrating them and worshipping them. But of course, there is one advantage. If you are an atheist and you have Lenin as your semi-god or quasi-god, is that you don't think that he's all-seeing. If you have a God, you kind of accept that he is all-powerful, he's omnipotent, that is all-seeing, and he sees you and all your sins. And at one time, there will be a reckoning when you're dead. And the thing is that even though God is dead, you're dead. Your mortality is not dead. And it is a thing that you may make us reluctant about thinking about death. Death is that it reminds us that we just have one chance. There was a media critic some years ago who coined the expression that we are amusing ourselves to death, that modern society and all its relativism is about, just amusement. And if you think about death and dying, it makes it more hard to think about life as just a place where you should amuse yourself. You should also make something out of the chance that you have when you are here. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger, he said that thinking about death may help us live more authentically. And that means, taking life more seriously and trying to be more true to ourselves and kind of ask, what is my vocation? What should I really make out of life? And there is a kind of tension between postmodernism and, of course, serious postmodernist philosophers will not agree that, to this kind of condensed version of postmodernism that it says everything is permissible. But still, postmodernism is a way of thinking where everything is kind of relative. Nothing is absolute. What I think is just what I think. What you think is what you think. There's no truth. But even though there is no truth, perhaps, there is one absolute thing, and that is death. So this is a reminder that however postmodern you might be, the relativism of your life, it ends when you confront death. That is something you cannot avoid. That is something that is not just subjective, that is very objective. And there is also some thing about when we think about death that we might, ask this thing about what will St. Peter ask you about when he stands there at the gate. And that is just another way of saying what kind of reckoning, what kind of account, what kind of balancing of your life will you be thinking about. And we see that very clearly in Akem. As I said in the beginning, Akem is about meditation and communication. And we have communication courses, and we have guidance group. We are quite personal with regard to your life, especially at the deepening retreats, where you meditate for a long time and get in touch with things that are really basic issues in your life. And then we see that, the position that is so important in modern times about being a victim. We're so kind of talking about victimization. At least when you get older, the important questions that really is hard to have some kind of reconciliation about, that is very really hard, maybe hard to find peace with yourself. That is not really what your parents did to you, what kind of victim you were, but it is what you did to your children or to your surroundings or to your partners or to your colleagues or to whatever. What is kind of more difficult to when you are confronting the end of life and the kind of thinking about your balance, that is your responsibilities. What did you make out of it, and what the actions that you really regret, it may not normally be towards the end of your life, or thinking at the end of, towards the end of your life, that will not be what others did to you, that is what you did to others. So it is your own action, that is, that is the basic message in meditation as taught by Arke. It is what matters is your own actions during meditation, not what happens to you. And the same thing about your life confronting death. The most important thing may be your own actions. Another place where there may be some kind of difference between modern thinking and thinking about death is rights. Human rights is a very important part of modern thinking. Human rights was one of the good legacies of Hitler, that you saw all the fascist violations, and the world decided that we need some kind of stopper for this, some kind of guard against this, bulwark against this, and we established human rights. And that has grown so strongly that there's been some kind of, you might say, modern religion. And it is a very important part of political life, that there is something called human rights. There are some kind of violations that are absolute and should not be tolerated. But it is important not to kind of take rights thinking so far that you think that this is really something that is existentially valid. In nature, even though human rights were called natural rights originally, the kind of philosophical background is natural rights also, then there are no human rights in nature. And when it comes to basic things in life, you have no right to nice children, you might hope to have so. You have no right to a nice partner, you may have so. You have a political and legal right not to have a partner that hits you and beats you and violates you, but you have no right to a loving partner in existential terms. And you have no right not to die. And unfortunately, you have no right to a good death. And if you are too much into rights thinking, then when you get ill and you start approaching death, reconciliation with that destiny may be more difficult. And you might also say that so death is also violating narcissism. I think there's one very interesting, we have several commentators about Queen Elizabeth, and one thing is, one comment that is, I think you see several places, I think is very true, that because of her devotion to duty, she had this kind of anti-narcissistic philosophy or lifestyle or existential position. And you might say that narcissism is, you can't call it a religion, but you might say that, sometimes by emphasizing so strongly that the individual is the ultimate and sacred value in modern times, then you are kind of elevating narcissism to some kind of absolute position. And it's quite clear that death is something that does not respect the individual. It does not respect your wish to live. And it does not really think that you are special, because when we are confronting death, we end up being one more of these 100 billion persons when we're going exactly the same way. So that is also something that is part of the relationship between meditation and thinking about death, is that during long meditations, no one is special. We all have experienced restlessness. We all experience boredom. That is kind of surprising for people who start meditating, is that no, they meet people who are meditating for 50 years and they still are experiencing restlessness. And you might then start asking, doesn't this thing really work? And you might put the question, put the whole thing opposite and say, it is because it works. It is because meditation helps you to get to the border of your existential positions and your kind of understanding that you get into restlessness and boredom. And if you expect that you should not get restless and bored if you do meditation, it's like expecting that you should not get tired if you do physical exercises or if you do a marathon. So meditation is a way to experience that you are not very special, really. You are very much like other persons. And thinking about confronting death has something of the same in it. It is accepting that I am not very special. And that may be, kind of sad message, but really it is a very positive message. Because if you accept that you are ordinary, that is another way of saying that you are basically a human being. And if you do meditation, you may get in touch with something that is universal. That is what we basically share as human beings if we allow those basic dimensions to be part of our consciousness. And so being ordinary is also another way of saying that you are into something universal. And thinking about this, as I said in the beginning, it is helping you to cross centuries. Thinking about this is entering a thing like a time machine, where you cross centuries and you get in touch with what also other persons have been feeling. Because we all know that we are going to die. And people have been knowing that from the early times immortal. And and that is part of being a human being. And that is one way of kind of feeling, what is it like being a human being across all ages, across all cultures? And here, universality is not trivialization. Being ordinary is not being trivial. Being ordinary here means being in contact with some basic dimensions in our life, and it means transcendence and universality. And one of the reasons why it may be good to think about this while we are still alive is that meditation and thinking about death may guide our choices in life, our ethical and existential choices. We say that when you meditate for longer periods, you may get into touch with some kind of silence within you. And silence, as talked about in Aachen, is not defined in a negative way. It's not defined through the absence of noise, but it's defined through the presence of something living inside you. That is best described as a living silence. And this living silence, that may help you in your kind of everyday choices to kind of try to feel what is there inside me that vibrates and how does it vibrate in accordance with what I'm now contemplating doing. And you might also say that thinking about death and dying may help you to kind of guide yourself in your life, not in a clear way, but in some way. It may be something that you may help you in your ethical considerations. And one day we shall die, people say sometimes, and all the other days we shall live. So that is a way also that you might deny a little bit about death. because it doesn't really matter, because that's just what will happen to us one day. But you might say that all the other days when we live, thinking about death and being aware that we are mortal, may help us into some kind of humility, some kind of compassion, because we are all mortals. We are all vulnerable. And thinking about our own finality may help us kind of feel more responsible for our own lives and actions, and for how we relate to others. And if you want a slogan, you might say that death tells us that life matters. And we started out by saying that this would be one long argument, why thinking about death and contemplating death may be good for you. But I think you might widen the perspective when we now are at the last slide. You might say that contemplating this, it may be good for you. It may also be good for the world. You may kind of ask this question that is a bit uncomfortable to ask. It is that why is our world so restless and so dissatisfied? We are dissatisfied with the authorities. We are dissatisfied with the kind of healthcare we receive, with the welfare state, etc., etc., etc. And you might say that when King George died, the father of Queen Elizabeth, then in 1953 or 1952 years, then 70 years ago, then the kind of healthcare he received would be the absolute best that the UK could offer. But it still would be in some respects much worse than most average persons receive today through the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, even though they complain a lot about it. You would get better palliative care today. You would die in a more kind of less painful way, and you're still quite dissatisfied. We have a better kind of healthcare, and we have a better kind of welfare state in Western Europe and in the US than most people ever had, and most people have in other parts of the world. We are still dissatisfied. And of course, there are legitimate political reasons for this, and we should definitely not try to change the world into a better place. But you may also ask the question, all this dissatisfaction, has that also to do with some kind of existential vacuum in modern times? That there is something lacking, and there is something lacking that we really need to do. We really need to relate to the fundamental questions in life to be satisfied as human beings. And that means that to be satisfied, you will not be satisfied just through amusing yourself to death. You will be satisfied also by contemplating about basic questions in life. You may get help to that from meditation. You may get help to that from contemplating death and other philosophical questions that are basic. And by doing that, you don't get into that kind of modern happy mode, but you may get into a more satisfied mode, because we are here as human beings for a limited period of time, and it may be good for us to think about what that basically means. And it's sorry to say, but that also includes thinking about this, because that is one of the most basic dimensions about being a human being. Okay, thank you.